Welcome to Dump Truck Toolbox. I'm Alan, and today we're going to talk about how much a dump truck driver can negotiate their pay. And we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Peter McHenry, who is a professor of economics and public policy with a specialization in labor economics. And we had a great conversation the other day. This is the continuation of that conversation with a focus in on negotiating pay and a surprising turn to talk about unions and even a little insight into Jimmy Hoffa, the late great president of the Teamsters Union.
For truck drivers, I don't think of this as a situation where there just aren't truck drivers available. There aren't people who could be truck drivers. It's just people are making reasonable decisions in their lives, looking at the offer, wages and benefits and hours and working conditions. And they're saying that's not exactly what I want. I've got better opportunities, just as you said. I've got a CDL, but another industry, another occupation, I'm getting paid more, or I like the hours better, or something like that. And so if you're trying to hire truck drivers, by all means, try to make the job more attractive. And raising wages is one thing that you can do.
For someone looking for a job driving a dump truck, how much bargaining power do they have to negotiate a reasonable starting wage?
That's a great question. And I guess it would depend a lot on the setting. So we are in a situation where employment of truck drivers, heavy truck drivers, has risen quite fast. And it's clear that they're very productive in the sense that big businesses really need truck drivers to move freight and cement and lots of things around. I got that wrong. Or you move concrete, not cement, right? Or anyway.
Well, I moved broken up concrete, but I also moved dirt and gravel.
Anyway,
Love sand.
moving things, right? Yeah. But there are a lot of things that need to be moved, and a lot of people who are willing to pay to get them moved. And so if you have a clean driving record and can show up on time and do all the technical things that you need to do safely to get the truck operated, then I'm sure you would be a very valued member of the team. Bargaining power, I'm not exactly sure how that works in the industry. I immediately jump to thinking about labor unions when you ask about bargaining power. A labor union that is strong will have a lot of bargaining power because at the end of the day, they can say all our driver members are just going to walk off if you don't agree to this contract. And that would be very, very bad for the employer. And so the employer often gives them more than they otherwise would. Unionization among heavy truck drivers these days is not very frequent or common. I mean, I'm sorry, there are unions. It's not very widespread, I think is the word, right? And so you do see movements toward more unionization in some pockets of the labor market. And so more unionization would probably lead to more bargaining power. But since there aren't particularly widespread unions in the occupation now, I don't think there's a whole lot of bargaining power. Unionization has fallen a lot in the US since the mid 20th century. And so we've continued to see that decline for the past couple of decades. I wonder sometimes, though, you see Amazon workers unionizing, you see Starbucks workers unionizing, you see right now the writers and actors in Hollywood are on strike. And so when I read coverage of those, they seem to be pretty sympathetic characters in the narrative, right? I don't see a whole lot of union bashing like I might have a couple of decades ago. So I wonder if things for unions are at an inflection point, maybe turning around a bit. I don't know if we're going to go back to the 1950s, but we might see some more unionization. I don't know if you want to say too much in public about that, Alan, but
No, I have a long-term interest in unions and the impact on employers and workers, really more from the organizational psychology perspective. But let me throw an idea by you. One of the people whose opinion I respect has said that the deregulation of the trucking industry, going back, I guess, to the 80s, really sort of gutted the unionized carriers, and for long haul freight, the demand for the freight haulers became competitive, and then they lost the monopoly pricing power, and then independent and smaller companies popped up to haul the freight, and then the workers, it's like, well, I don't have a union job anymore, so now I'm driving for a different company. And I think the same would be true in the dump truck business, especially for people who are either independent haulers or are have their own small fleet of 5 or 10 trucks. The competition would be such that a unionized hauler wouldn't be able to compete. If the going rate is $105 an hour for a certain size dump truck, unionization might drive you out of that business. And so I think that's a big part of it, that there's so much flexibility in terms of where you get your dump trucks that it'd be hard for a union drive to be very successful.
Unions, you're right, absolutely can be more successful in industries with less competition in the output market, so to the consumer. Because if you have a monopoly business, that increases your profits. And when workers come around and say, hey, we are going to walk off if you don't give us a share of those big profits, the firm can say, all right, well, yes, I've got these big profits. It would be really bad for me to lose all of those. I have a lot to lose, and I have plenty to give in some sense. I'm not going to go out of business if I capitulate to your terms, and so I'll give you a better deal. And competition shrinks that pie, that profit, and makes it harder for unions to bargain. But at the same time, you can still imagine unions being a successful part of the industry working. It would depend on union workers banding together, really, industry-wide, occupation-wide, across firms. And so that's what we see in some settings, other countries as well. And I guess it hasn't happened here. I'm not sure what exactly would be the best thing, quite honestly, but unionization has given some real great benefits to a lot of people, to a lot of workers historically. And they've shrunk so much in the US that I suspect maybe the optimal level of unionization is higher than we have reached.
When I was teaching at the University of Delaware, one of my colleagues had done his dissertation on the Teamsters. And he was getting his doctorate in business from Harvard, and he actually got access to follow Jimmy Hoffa around for like 14 months. Just everywhere Hoffa went, he went. I mean, he got closed out of certain meetings, obviously. And he says that he said, and he's since passed away, but actually published a book on his experiences with the Teamsters and following Hoffa around. And I don't know if this made it into his book or not, but he would claim in person that he knew where Hoffa's body was buried. There's a specific bridge that he thought was built by a union friendly, maybe mob friendly company, and the timing was right. So he thought Hoffa was under a certain piling in that bridge, and so we're all his colleagues are, all the professors are raptly leaning forward, like, okay, let's do this. He says, all I need is, like, whatever the figure was, $35 million to tear the bridge down and dig under that piling, and we'll find him. And that was the punchline. Oh yeah, right. Like,
35 million. Yeah,
yeah.
no problem, right?
But I do think, the decline of the Teamsters uh, specifically impacted the well-being of a lot of truck drivers,
Mm-hmm.
where they lost the ability to say, you want to move, this manufactured good from here to there, you're going to have to carry it on a Teamsters affiliated carrier.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, the union, the forces in the economy were causing, the deregulation and everything else caused a decline, but then also the union itself got wrapped up in things that decreased their strategic focus and ended up, being at exactly the wrong time. Let me jump in here. This interview was filmed in late July of 2023, and just a few days later, Yellow Freight Lines announced its bankruptcy. Yellow, as you probably know, was a less than truckload freight carrier, and with the bankruptcy, they laid off tens of thousands of drivers and many other employees. According to a news story from Reuters, Yellow has blamed the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Union for its failure, but the union and analysts blamed mismanagement, saying the debt-laden company's submarket rates made it difficult to offset the higher cost of running the companies it bought as separate entities. The link to this news story is in the comments below. Let's get back to the interview.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I looked around a little bit. I saw an Indeed post that said union wages. We're trying to hire a driver and union wages, and so I wasn't clear if that meant they were a union shop or just paying the union negotiated rate. Probably the latter, but anyway, it's a fascinating thing to watch. I teach labor economics to William and Mary undergrads. I love it. It's one of my favorite classes. And we have lots of different topics we need to cover about the labor market, how we set wage, or how wages are set in the market. We talk about unemployment. We talk about the minimum wage law and all these things. And I change the order sometimes of introduction based on how important things are. So when everything was just gangbusters and it was really easy to get a job, unemployment's kind of late in the class. We don't really talk about unemployment a whole lot because students aren't talking about unemployment. Their friends aren't getting unemployed. And so I kind of push it off a little bit. Great Recession time, unemployment was as early as it could possibly go in the class. But I always teach about labor unions. I think it's very important. I will continue to do that, but they're way at the end of the class, the semester, because 10% of workers thereabouts, and it's just they're not as strong as they used to. But I made a prophecy this last semester when I taught the class. I said, I think that in the next 20 years, I'm going to teach about unions earlier in the semester, because I think something is going to change. Workers are going to change their strategy, their preferences somehow. I think unions are going to increase the share of workers somehow. I'm not going to say it's going to be half of workers or anything like that, but I just wonder. I'm very reluctant to make predictions. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but I just think there might be something to that.
My first boss at Ford had been the labor manager for one of the major divisions in Ford US. And he had a saying that companies get the unions they deserve. And
Oh.
Ford got a very militant United Auto Workers, and they probably deserved it. In the 20s and 30s, there was a lot of bad behavior on the part of
Mhm.
the company and management. But then
Yeah.
the second part of his proposition was union, companies get the unions they deserve, and once they get them, they can never get rid of them.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing in the auto industry is right now there is a probably pretty contentious labor negotiation going on, and that goes back. And it goes back to the 90s when I was in the auto industry, but it really goes back to the 20s and 30s.
Mhm.
Um,
The
the
contention
the
and
legacy U.S.
yeah.
auto manufacturers are still dealing with some of the abuses going back, 100 years.
Mhm.
And so I think that's part of it, that you need stable employers, because in things like technology, um, you know, companies come and go, and by the time you get the legacy of mistrust between workers and management, and then you get the union drive, and then you have a couple of successful union negotiation rounds. Well, technology's changed. You're no longer making mainframe computers with an IBM label
Right.
on them. You're making, you know, um, smartphones that can do more than any mainframe ever could. So
Oh, how the shipping container. This is the book. It's
okay,
really good. I've only read a few chapters, so I can't be a witness to the whole thing, but it's really fascinating. It's the story mostly starting in the 1950s when container ships and containerization really took off. And part of the narrative was about trucking. One of the major players here was a truck driver who owned a truck freight business. He came out of North Carolina. His name is Malcolm McLean, and he got into shipping, and it's pretty awesome. But one of the things about it was he was trying to make profits, and he was saying, well, he didn't have the rights to that passage or the prices for this route were such and such. And I thought, I was a little puzzled actually, and I realized, oh, they're talking about the Interstate Commerce Agency, the ICC, and they just said this is how much shipping freight from here to there will cost, and that's the rate. And so that was the regulation that we got, that got deregulated, of course. And there isn't an ICC anymore. It's actually, I think it was dissolved in 1995. So I just wasn't really familiar with the idea that there wouldn't be competition in the freight market, and there was some competition, but it was highly regulated, as you were talking about earlier.
interesting stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So Peter, I appreciate your insights. I think people on the channel here will really benefit from listening to the things that you've been talking about. Um, if you find this video useful or interesting, please click the like button. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Look forward to seeing you again soon on the Dump Truck Toolbox.